Back in September 2015, we were mocking feminists here on the Freedom Alternative on their attempt to use academic clout to ban sex robots. Now, we laughed a bit then, explained the economics of the issue, and tossed the subject aside. Almost 2 years since then, feminists have moved from the denial phase to the bargaining phase. They have realized in the meantime, well, some of them anyway, that this is not a phenomenon that you can stop, and that laws and regulations really don't matter when it comes to technological innovation. There will always be a country that doesn't give a shit about feminist sensibilities. So under these new conditions, feminists have upgraded their discourse to seemingly more sophisticated levels. As a result, non-feminists have to advance, or at least get a better laugh. Let's explore. Hello everyone, and welcome to the Freedom Alternative. Alright, so it's summer, it's a slow news period, and I'm also preparing massive changes here on the channel, so let's go after a mildly lower hanging fruit, although this video should be seen as a continuation of the video called The Next Narrative on Sexual Politics. Now, speaking of the Next Narrative videos, 2 more episodes from that series are in the work to go out before I go to Georgia and Armenia. And speaking of Georgia, please consider throwing a shekel for that endeavor too. Alright, with that said, let's dive in. We'll use an article published earlier this month on the Telegraph titled, "Why Female Sex Robots Are More Dangerous Than You Think." Now, the title is misleading. It suggests that this feminist will try to fearmonger, but it's really just bargaining. Alright. So we'll read and interrupt as it goes. Quote, "I was going to start this article about robots with a reference to Fritz Lang's Metropolis, but then I spoke to Blay Whitby, a philosopher concerned with the social impact of emerging technologies and the trivialization of robots in the media, and I decided otherwise. Because when it comes to robots, it's simply no use discussing them through the lens of our favorite film or science fiction book. Cliched as it may be, the future is here. We can and should talk about reality. Within a matter of decades, we've become entirely reliant on technology, and robots are increasingly part of our everyday lives. Now it is estimated that realistic sex robots will become more common within a decade." Now, skipping a bit, according to Dr. Trudy Barber, a pioneer in the impact of technology on sexual intercourse, our growing immersion in technology means that it is only a matter of time before it takes a mainstream role in sex. Put simply, sex between couples will increasingly be saved for special occasions as robots step in to satisfy our everyday needs. Speaking at the International Congress of Love and Sex with Robotics last year, Dr. Barber predicted that the use of artificial intelligence devices in the bedroom will be socially normal within 25 years, and that the machines would enable people to appreciate the real thing. "I think what will happen is that they will make real-time relationships more valuable and exciting," she added. "Devices such as Rocky or Roxy True Companion can currently be bought for around £7,000, but advances in the field are predicted to make sex robots increasingly lifelike and affordable." Indeed, in April last year, a man figured out a way to make a robot in his own home that resembled a woman they don't know. Ricky Ma, 42, a Hong Kong-based man with no formal training in robots, spent £35,000 to create a robotic woman who looks exactly like Scarlett Johansson, and there's absolutely nothing she can do about it. Unlike the vivacious and intelligent actress, his robotic counterpart was programmed to respond to questions like, "You are very beautiful and you're so cute," with little more than a coquettish smile and a wink. Alright? So this author is clearly scared. So she's setting the stage here by laying out a set of facts and arranging them in such a way to suggest a sense of emergency. And it is an emergency from her perspective anyway. I mean, she's ugly, fat, alone, way past her best years, and just realized that not only biology is catching up with her, but also technology. But before she goes into bargaining, she gives us some lies. Quote, it is a disappointing reflection on the way women are portrayed in society. Ma's clever three-dimensional creation is about as one-dimensional as you can get. Is all of this cause for concern? Of course, because right now more money is being spent on making these things than thinking about the ethical and social ramifications. We already know porn provides a terrifying reflection on how society views women, which can manifest itself in real life. But what happens when machines start contributing to the objectification of women too? Now, all of this is a lie, and it's a lie when the religious right peddles it, and it's a lie when the religious left peddles it. If porn were so bad, then countries with the most lax porn regulations wouldn't also be the safest nations on earth for women. It would be quite the reverse, wouldn't it? As for the objectification part, this is standard feminist/religious left evangelism. The faith-based dogma that basic functions of biology that makes us attracted to one another in order to have sex and produce babies is somehow a bad thing. This is dogma. If anything, in this context, I would worry a lot more about women's objectification of men. I mean, at the very least, men try to emulate the full package. Women however, used dildos, which not only objectifies but dehumanizes men. That's what I would say if I were a progressive. Now, thank God I'm not, and thus I can understand biology and also am thick-skinned enough not to spend my time worrying what other people do on their own property and with their property. Because yes, dildos, sex bots, and all the rest are just that, property to be disposed of as the owner deems fit. You triggered already? Because I'm about to get a lot worse. All right. Let's read some more. Quote, there's also a real worry that people will abuse robots assigned human traits, whether it be in a sexual or physical way. Whitby thinks it is a legitimate concern. Will people mistreat robots? Oh yes, I'm sure. The reason I'm sure is because they already do. The way people first meet artificial intelligence is in a character in a video game that they're shooting at. As we are yet to truly understand the effect of that playing violent video games has on young minds, it will be years before we even begin to comprehend the knock-on effects that the mistreatment of human-like robots has on our behavior towards each other. Now, how about you go fuck yourself, lady? I mean, seriously, go suck a bag of dicks or something. How much longer do we have to tolerate disdainful helicopterables introducing more falsehoods about video games into any discussion? And mind you, I don't even play video games. Not much into it, even when I was younger. If everyone had played as many video games as I did, the video game industry would have never existed. But this is precisely why this is annoying to me, because if I know you're bullshitting, even as I'm not a gamer, then it's clear you know it too, which means you're not deluded, but intentionally lying. And that really has to stop. Alright, so this author goes on to quote Kathleen Richardson, an old friend of this channel whose immense stupidities we refuted back in 2015 as well. Now this is Kathleen Richardson. Noticing a pattern yet? Virtually all of those who argue against sex robots are extremely ugly and remarkably stupid women. And they're not ugly because of genetics, but because of inability to stop eating. Anyway, this lady, Kathleen Richardson, is on a personal crusade against sex robots, though with not much of a success judging by the like-dislike ratio of her talks. I mean, I haven't been able to find a video on YouTube in which she appears and the video to have at least 40% likes and only 60% dislikes. Most are very lopsided to the tune of 90% dislikes. But nevertheless, she does persist, trying to persuade the people in the industry, you know, the people who actually do stuff and build stuff instead of whining like a feminist land whale that people are having fun. She's trying to convince those to adopt her deluded ideas. Quote, Dr. Kathleen Richardson, a senior research fellow in the ethics of robotics at the Center of Computing and Social Responsibility. Whenever you hear social into something, you know it's bullshit. Anyway, Kathleen Richardson has done extensive research into this area, especially in regards to women. Of course she did. She says, quote, a machine like the portrayal of women in pornography, prostitution, and the media are entirely objects for male gratification. But women aren't like what males see in pornography or in prostitution or in popular media. In these areas, women are coerced or told how to behave, act, or how to act, or behave with, seriously, the Telegraph, get an editor. Anyway, women are told these with the threat of money or violence. In real life, women really have their own thoughts and feelings and preferences and desires. It seems logical that if this extreme control can't be experienced by men with real women, the only next step is to create artificial objects. Well, the portrayal of men in pornography and prostitutions are entirely objects for female gratification. Heck, in Sweden, for instance, more men than women sell sex. And I'm not joking. Not to mention the huge popularity of videos with lonely dudes masturbating. 98% of the people watching those are women. Take a trip to Plebit, Reddit, on the r/sex and start reading there. Ironically, it is feminists, and uniquely feminists, who think women are so sexually inept that they don't have desire of gratification of their own and that they don't lust for pleasure in similar ways. And it's only feminists who believe that. The traditional religionists, for instance, never believed that. Quite the opposite. They believed that women are hypersexual and should thus be tamed by various societal constraints on female sexuality in order to avoid the creation of bastards, i.e., out of wedlock children. In other words, there is really nobody on earth except the tiny, minuscule minority of militant feminists who have such a dim view of female sexuality. It may be because fat, ugly, dyke, and feminist correlate that much and solipsism does the rest. I don't know. Just saying. Anyway. She then continues on to blame everyone, like any good feminist. Quote, the people creating these robots are also partly to blame. A 2014 Nesta study titled Our Work Here Is Done, Visions of a Robot Economy examined how gender is assigned to machines in the workplace. Researchers found that male robots are thought to be better at repairing technical devices, while female robots are thought to be more suited to domestic and caring services. In other words, people with gendered ideas make robots that conform to gender norms, which then perpetuates existing stereotypes. As long as these norms go unchallenged and robots are designed to fulfill perceived gender roles, has anyone yet talked about a male sex robot? This vicious circle will continue. But it doesn't have to be this way. What if the people programming and designing these robots didn't have such a stereotypical views? What if they used this amazing new platform to defy gender stereotypes and rather than serving as a poor reflection on society, instead inspired us to look at ourselves in new ways? It's a nice thought, but as long as manufacturers tend to make a profit from robotics and see these types of characterizations as a means to creating more humanized, relatable machines that sell better, not much is going to change. So, here's a nice mixture of misandry, hatred of civilization, and anti-capitalism. They always seem to go hand in hand with these people, doesn't it? But the fact of the matter is that it is not the profit from robotics that is to blame for this, but it's the fact that humans will always tend to create these things in their own image, and guess what? The overwhelming majority of humans, especially highly logical humans like those who work in robotics, have a very clear sense of why sex roles exist and why they're good, and why they're good where they are, and why they satisfy most men and most women. Earlier today, I videotaped a clip about women freezing their eggs because they suddenly realized that their careers are worth jack shit. and motherhood, as it turns out, is much more desirable and fulfilling. Now, I don't know in which order will I publish these, so I don't know if you've seen it or not, but in any event, the point is that most women and most men are very happy with assuming their sex roles. In any event, the absolute lunacy comes at the end of the article, where this feminist, using selective quotes from another idiot, a Yale ethicist, argues for legislation. And I presume she has a volunteer to draft the bills based on her ideas that are popular exactly with nobody. Anyway, let's read. Quote, at the 2016 American Association for the Advancement of Science, the world's largest scientific society annual meeting, Yale ethicist Wendell Wallach spoke of his concerns about AI. He said, quote, there is a need for more concerted action to keep technology a good servant and not let it become a dangerous monster. While codes exist to guide the creation of machines, the lack of law in place means that time and effort is being plowed into manufacturing and programming, and no one is thinking twice about the effects this will have on living and breathing humans. Being cautious isn't sexy in the business of technology, and it rarely comes with financial rewards. Whitby urged us to act now, before it's too late. We need to have these discussions instead of waking up one day when robot companions are normal and question whether it was a good idea or not, he says. And as this kind of technology is rolled out around the world, he had a stark warning about where the democratization of technology is taking us. How would you feel about your ex-boyfriend getting a robot that looked exactly like you just in order to beat it up every night? It's a shocking idea, isn't it? On the one hand, it's a machine, it isn't you. But then it is you, because it stands for you and who you are. Whitby added, quote, I mean, it might be alright, it might mean he can be calmer and more normal with you. Think about Aristotle's theory of catharsis. But we really haven't discussed this as a society. We're drifting towards it and the technology is very close to being available, but we just aren't talking about it, close quote. It's time we start having these conversations before those oft-quoted science fiction dystopias become a nightmarish reality. And then academics wonder why virtually nobody cares what they think anymore. Well, it might have something to do with the fact that the academe has consistently been producing complete morons for the last 3 decades or so. I mean, this guy seriously believes that the lack of law in place is a relevant issue. This tells you everything you need to know about how out of touch these people are. So let me mansplain it for you. Your laws don't matter. Your laws can't stop people from buying heroin, which is obviously a worse thing than sex bots, and yet you seriously think having laws in place will make a goddamn difference? Seriously? Having laws and agencies and regulations in place did nothing to stop the very wide spread of cocaine and heroin, but somehow everything will magically work when it comes to sex bots because some fat feminists with nothing of value ever created in their entire miserable lives says so. Yeah, right. Also, the examples are quite puerile and irrelevant. For instance, how would you feel about your ex-boyfriend getting a robot that looked exactly like you just in order to beat it up every night? And the correct answer to this is, who cares? How would you feel about me printing a picture of you and throwing darts at it? Oh wait, this has been going on for some time, and the planet didn't collapse. However, this ethicist has a point, although unwittingly, when he says that, quote, we really haven't discussed this as a society. We're drifting towards the technology, towards it, and the technology is very close to being available, but we just aren't talking about it, close quote. That's somewhat a legitimate point to make, but not for the reasons he's making it. Look, there is no doubt that sex bots will have some effect. But will it be similar to the introduction of the pill, i.e. fundamentally transform the relationship between the sexes, or will it be rather similar to the introduction of the dildo some several thousands of years ago, i.e. not much of an effect? Also, alarmists buy into the investor pitches by these startup companies and appear to believe that it's a matter of years until everyone will have a sex bot. It doesn't really work like that. Most people on the planet have never owned a dildo, even though they're readily available at very affordable prices, much more affordable than any sex bot will get within our lifetimes. So it is thus quite unreasonable to think that the demand will be so huge that in 20 years or so, having a sex bot in your house will be like having a laptop. It doesn't quite work that way. In other words, the effect will be much smaller than the Kathleen Richardsons of the world would like to scare you with, but also it will be a non-null effect, to borrow from the language of programmers. So, what will it be, the effect? It's a lot harder to predict, though it is fair to say it won't be the one anticipated by the gender ideologues du jour. On that front, the effect will be comparable to VR porn or the emergence of broadband that can deliver non-stop porn without repeating itself for several centuries in a row. That is to say, not much. However, there will be an effect on the sexual market, and women like Kathleen Richardson and Toby Jackson G., the author of this Telegraph article, stand to lose the most out of this. And they instinctively know this, though of course they don't dare to articulate it that way because it would be too obvious that most of the feminist outrage is basically just sexual trade unionism. And you know what we capitalists like to do with trade unions, right? Nevertheless, whether they articulate it or not, sex bots, especially the very realistic ones, which are still much further away than the techno-optimists in the industry would have you believe, those sex bots will forever change the course of the lives of women like these, and change it for the worse, at least at first. Then it will be up to them. If they adapt, the damage will be minuscule, but if they don't, and many won't, at least at first, the damage will be quite harsh. And I know this sounds mean and insensitive, but I assure you not much meanness is intended, and not many fucks are given about the insensitive part. Facts don't care about your feelings, as my favorite Jew likes to say. And the fact of the matter is that such thing as the sexual market exists, and it works just like any other market. With supply and demand, transactions happen when incentives are there, and where, just like on any other market, an equivalent product can replace a pre-existing one. It's nothing personal, just supply and demand. And one can rest assured that a lonely guy in his 50s, if he can choose between a sex bot that looks like a 17-year-old that also talks nicely, even if with a limited vocabulary, and a feminist land whale that nags everyone around her, the choice will be obvious, and everyone knows it. So based on these realities, there are really two distinct possibilities. The possibility number one is the one that gives headaches to many people, namely a further degeneration of the relationship between the sexes. And the possibility number two being the one in which, under market pressure, women will yield to the new constraints and will reform in a way. With vagina as social currency out on the window, women will have to invest a lot more in their social capital during their youth and when they approach mid-30s to get used to competing harder, because they'll no longer be competing just against the hot 16, 17, 18, 19-year-olds out there, but also against very realistic bots that always look like they're 17 or 25 or whatever the age desired by the owner. And yes, I say owner. Because no matter how much whining the Richardsons of the world will pour, nobody will see sex bots as human beings in neither a moral nor a legal sense. It just doesn't work that way. And if such a law will be passed, it will be in some irrelevant place like Sweden or Iceland. It won't be in Japan, Hong Kong, the United States, India, and other places where the revenue from this will be so big due to sheer numbers that no one will care what the feminists say. I mean, think of 1% of Indian men buying a sex bot. That's already almost 7 million customers. For $7,000 a piece, assuming that they all just buy one, that's $49 billion of shekels that circulate through India's economy just from this endeavor alone. Feminists have been able to beat many things, but there are two things they were never able to beat: biology and capitalism, or in other words, nature. Now, of course, there are other possibilities than these two, but I contend that they would be a mixture of these two. And I think the most affected will be the women in countries with very, very misandric laws, such as India, Canada, the United States, Argentina, France, where even looking at a woman the wrong way can land you in jail, and also smaller places population-wise, like Sweden, Australia, and so on. In places like China, the Intermarium, southwestern Europe, most of South America, and of course Africa, this won't be an issue because these are places where women have swallowed much less of the feminist nonsense. And there will be unintended consequences and collaterals, but I have to admit I have a very hard time to give a damn, especially in highly feminist countries, because at the end of the day, women as a whole did absolutely nothing for decades and allowed the feminists to ruin everything for everyone. Well, capitalism has its way of correcting aberrations, and I fucking love capitalism. So yeah, ultimately I do agree with the ethicist from Yale that we should be talking about this, but in terms of what women will be willing to do for men in order for men to start giving a shit again. In any other terms, the conversation is really pointless. The technology doesn't care about anyone's feelings, so you can imagine that women's feelings on this rank very, very, very low in the grand scheme of things. Women will have to experience, perhaps for the first time in history, what's it like to be outcompeted and pushed aside by technology and then crushed under the market pressure to reform, adapt, and reinvent yourself in order to stay relevant. Almost every generation of men in the last 8 years has felt that at least once. Women will finally be equal in this regard too. And I can hardly wait for that to happen. And with all of that being said, thank you all for watching. Thank you for your continuous and generous support. And I'll see you all around on Freedom Alternative.